Hey Yuri, we got the priority transmission. It is something about an operation don't suck as bad as my brother. Who is he and why should we care? That's right, boys and girls, it's Take or Treat, and we have one priority. Don't suck. Last time on Ouchies Batreps.
And my opponent in the first round of the Tanker's Treat tourney is none other than Gearbarbs. But he fails motivation anyway, and it causes the unit to break out. The CO decides to stay, fight on, and so I'm going to have to assault it.
Hans, Franz, Gruber, get out.
For the fatherland!
Yeah! For this Tanker Treat, I'm bringing in the Soviets. I've got some confident, trained T-34 spam bringing in with Dead Off, which seems absolutely awesome for the points. And my first round opponent is none other than Gerbertson, running the Romanians with a bunch of knockoff Panzer IVs and Stugs. They use random motivation and skill rolls, so they potentially have a lot for very cheap. But of course, those rolls can go against them just as well as it can go for them. We are playing Dust Up, which allows quarter table deployment as well as some awkward locations for the objectives, and your reinforcements come in relatively close to the enemy, representing a kind of shifting battle line where nothing is quite obvious where everyone's coming or going. And we end up using pretty standard objective deployments, getting ours both close as we can and sending the ones that we have control over as far away as we possibly can. Deployment is important in a game like this, and I try to press the initiative with my opponent as much as possible by putting the ZIS-2 guns along the center where they're obviously going to defend, and then as he places down his pioneers and later his artillery, then I'm forced to place down where my main thrust is going to be, which is on the left side of the board with those T-34s. And since he has more platoons to respond in kind, he's able to deploy his Stugs in response. However, I still get first turn, and I'm not going to worry about it. It's a very narrow area up there to try to get those T-34s to break out. I'm a little concerned about his artillery, but the plan of action right now is to swing south. We're going to swing by those Stugs down there, and we're going to run into the infantry. He returns in kind by moving the Stugs forward, anticipating this move and trying to soften the blow for what is certainly going to be an onslaught of Soviet steel. The IL-2s thunder onto the field for the first time, and I consider where to put it. It got kind of the pick of the litter because there's nothing nearby to wave him off, and he's got a lot of AA over there, but it's a flying tank. I'm not going to worry about that. We're just going to let the shots ring home, and we're just going to ignore them. So we target down the artillery, we want to pin it, and we want to hopefully put the pioneers into consideration for their own mortal coil, preferably. The Soviet tanks rush forward, they start hitting the TAs as much as they can, and they don't quite put any of them down. As a matter of fact, the AA opens up on the IL-2, manages to kill one, and then pin quite a few of the infantry out there in the open. My buddy gets a little aggressive as he starts moving the export Stugs forward, trying to create better fire lanes, trying to negotiate which direction that I'm going to come from, and at least try to dissuade me from going through the opening between the two buildings there. And his artillery manages to find me and ranges in, killing and bailing quite a few tanks. He got really lucky with that 15-centimeter artillery bombardment. Just goes to show it always pays to spread out whenever you can. Which this is primarily the reason why you want air support and artillery, just to split up the fire lanes and make sure that you don't receive too many shots on a charge. But those IL-2s, man, they love coming back. We angle them around just a little bit more to get less return anti-aircraft fire. Again, this is going to be the critical turn. We need to pin that artillery. We need to pin as many of the units over there while moving in as many tanks, including some reserve T-34-85s that have come in off the board, because we are about to assault the objective. We open up, we fire, we bail out the Stug near them, we blow up the Stug on the bottom side of the board, and we are making headway. They are down to one Stug in the command unit down there on the southern end of the board, with the infantry holding on to the objective. And even though the IL-2 manages not to kill any of the infantry, it does manage to kill the other Romanian Stug, leaving the bottom side of the board completely defenseless in terms of tanks for the T-34 Horde. However, they still have one unit left sitting out there in the woods, one Stug that has been bailed and refuses to die. But he sees a flaw in my plan. He realizes I am playing for time, and so shall he. He gets his reserve roll. These Romanian Stugs comes in on the northern end of the board and are now making a beeline for the objective on my side of the board where my AT guns are ill-equipped to repair. He pulls in his artillery, starts hammering down the reserve element, the extra T-34s on the southern end of the board, and also manages to lay out a withering supply of fire from the AT gun off of the command Stug and the artillery bees. This is a desperate measure for the Soviets as I pull up the trucks to try to move some of those AT guns back to the other side of that hill, and I also get my reserves pulling in the Spetsnaz to just go in there and feed themselves into the meat grinder, buying myself at least a few turns so that the Soviet horde on the southern end of the board can secure the objective. Now, time is against me. I really need to get going onto that objective as quickly as possible. I have two options. I can start swinging the T-34s south below the building, reducing the avenue of fire that I can receive in an assault, and that'll take me an extra turn. Or I can send in the assault immediately. I get a little rash. I feel my oats. We're going to push the tanks forward. We have all our command elements. We have Dedov. We have everyone else. We're just going to ignore that Romanian Stug and push into the objective just as quickly as possible because I just don't know for how long those Spetsnaz can go up there, being just SMG teams, and just throw themselves under the tracks of the Stugs. So I pour into the assault. I gotta pull the pressure away from the northern objective, so I'm going to start assaulting the southern one. So he puts his reserves down there. He only has a couple shots. I'm hoping he's going to miss them, but he hits with the artillery piece, hits with another artillery piece, manages to kill another with a Panzerschreck, causing the assault to be pushed back. And as the tanks retreat, one of them gets bogged on his wreckage, trying to get away from that failed offensive, leaving me 4 tanks shorter for the effort. Even the Romanian Stug, stuck in the woods, manages to live through the cavalcade of shots. The T-34s are now ringing home into its side armor. And in response, the Romanians start getting their reserves. They get some knockoff Panzer IVs and they begin moving them up the center, trying to make sure that they keep me from devoting all of my AT assets one direction or another. And they also get some armored cars swinging wide on the northern end, ostensibly to take on the infantry should it had to come to that. It's certainly a response since the AT guns, the 57mm IS-2s, are plinking away at the tanks on the northern end of the board, but the shots are few and far between. But I'm not prone to rash actions by myself. My buddy throws his platoon out of their foxholes and starts crossing the hill into the tank company out in the open, and it's going to end just as well as you might imagine. My buddy begins panning over and starts shooting the mess out of the tanks. Every tank that's within 8 inches of the one that is bogged on in the wreckage of his comrades, and manages to kill 2 of them, leaving me the option to keep one of the tanks that was within 8 inches alive. So he goes ahead and tries to assault the tank that is stuck. I manage to return fire with about 8 machine gun dice, and I actually kill the guy. He doesn't get to assault, giving just a little bit more time for the bogged tank to free himself from the wreckage of his friends. Now, the assault has been mostly lost. I gotta try to keep this from turning into a complete disaster, so we start pulling the tanks back, again, plucking round after round into that Stug that won't die, while on the northern end we begin making crash action maneuvers as the infantry dismount from the captured half-tracks and the trucks dismount the AT guns in the direction that is apropos to keep the objective on the northern end safe. For the life of me, that Stug just will not die. I keep shooting it over and over again, and it just seems to be completely unaware or does not care that I'm just loading it full of HE rounds. Or maybe that's the reason why it's living. We're using HE. Romanians begin pulling in the rest of their reserves, now fully checking the Soviet offensive, and now it is a draw game for the Soviets. We got to try to play for points, because pulling in the objective on the southern end now no longer seems feasible, as they pull in more Panzer IVs to start swinging through the southern objective and swinging more Panzer IVs through the middle of the map. Even though they can't take the northern end, they are pinned down by the AT guns that are just hunkering around in the woods and around line of sight, so that they have to feed themselves one at a time. It's now up to the impetus on the southern end of the board. Romanian artillery begins ranging in on the gaggle of tanks in the middle of the town square, I guess that is over there, and manages to hit everything. All the Soviet tanks get hit, and most of the tanks die, except for the CIC and Dedov, which just brush it off. The round hits, bing, armor save, and they even managed to completely miss, even though it was under the template, the one Romanian Stug. They've got precision rounds coming out of those artillery pieces. The northern objective is held fast by the Soviets as they successfully countered the Romanians. They can't find a direct avenue of attack to take it on. The Soviets turn around, plaster the Stug in the woods, finally kill it, take advantage of the bailed and bogged CO. Can't quite kill him either, leaving the initiative back in the hands of the Romanians. This is the turn I found that makes or breaks most Soviet offensive, the turn where you stop and shoot with your tanks. And unfortunately, it didn't ring home a complete kill. The Romanians move forward. They are going to assault the AT guns out there in the open. The Panzer IVs have a pretty decent chance of taking them on if they're capable of pushing them off the objective. The Panzer IV is a pretty decent tank, even in the Romanian hands, and in his case, he has been getting mostly confident trained troops. He was kind of hoping for a little bit of few veterans or what have you, but he hasn't. He's been rolling for almost dead average. And now that he's going to roll into the assault, he really needs those veteran troops, and thankfully I had the foresight to turn the guns back around. They keep going back to rate of fire 1 because those ZIS-2s keep changing the direction they're facing. So the Panzers go into the assault. I managed to get quite a few shots at them too. Actually, from the ZIS-2 guns, I managed to bail one of them and the assault, but he manages to get his swing. He kills one, leaving the objective in the hands of the Romanians and the impetus completely in the hands of the Soviets. He realizes that this is a critical turn if I get air support, and I do. The IL-2s come in at the most desperate hour for the Soviets, and I range in. He's been very careful to place his units in such a way that I can only get one under the template, so I turn around and I use the ZIS guns to hopefully kill one of them. I get the air support to range in on another. ZIS-2 opens up, lights up one of the Panzer IVs. He assigns the hit to the target of the air support attack, and since I now have to wave it off or divert, there's not another target nearby, and the attack is completely called off. With nothing else to be able to respond, the game is called for the Romanians. They're going to take the objective in the beginning of their turn. This was a close game and well fought. And once again, he won the game because he knew the rules and took a very well calculated risk. Bravo. This has been an Ouchies Batrep, and thanks for watching. I really think that in hindsight, the units on the northern end of the board probably could have held off for another turn or two if I left them there. And I probably should have swung further south, just taken the extra turn and limited the amount of shots I was returning in return fire when I assaulted that infantry company. But that's what you get when you get a little too aggressive. However, end of tourney standings is looking a little grim, as even though I managed to pull a 2-5 loss, my brother managed to pull out a 3-4. And Hunter from the Batreps, who is a relative noob to the game, pulled out a 6-1, tabled the guy. I was kind of impressed.